Well, very good. Well, good evening, everyone. I am Ben Utes. I'm from designLAB Architects. Hopefully everybody can see my screen and hear just fine. I'm going to let people continue to trickle in here over the next minute or two, and then we'll be underway. Got a few more joining here. Okay, thanks, Eric. Yeah, if you could monitor the waiting room and let folks in as they come in, that'd be wonderful. I think it's a few minutes after 7 here, so we can get started. So hopefully all of you are in the right place. We're here to talk about the concept design phase as we reimagine the future of the Randall Library. I'll turn it over here to the library director, Tina McAndrew, to share some initial introductions, and then we'll be underway.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad that you all could make it tonight to the Randall Library Public Forum. I'm thrilled that so many of you are here to see what the building committee and the town administrator and designLAB have been working so hard on for the past year to renovate our library. As Ben said, for those of you that I have not met yet, I'm the library director. I'm Tina, and I am one member of the building committee, which also includes 6 other people. You can see their names here. Elisa Lavina and Kat Copeland are our community members. Morgan Hillman is the member from the Board of Trustees of the library. Peter McManus is from Capital Planning. Brian Patuto is from the Finance Committee, and Jim Salvi is from the Select Board. I just want to give a quick background to how we got here this evening. It started back in October of 2020 when the building committee was reestablished. And from October to February of 2021, we worked hard on writing a request for proposals, or an RFP as we refer to it. And that was approved in February. So in March, we posted the RFP publicly. And in April, 12 firms visited library for an initial walkthrough. 8 of those 12 submitted RFPs. And in May, the building committee reviewed all of the RFPs. And in June, we interviewed 5. So we narrowed it down from 12 to 8 to 5. And then in July, we unanimously recommended to the town administrator that we use designLAB, who's with us tonight. So in August, we started meeting, the building committee started meeting with designLAB, and they did a site visit along with their engineers and landscape architects. And in September, we started to see initial concept designs, including timelines and initial findings. So all of this planning and work brings us here to this point tonight. And I'm very excited to hear all of your feedback after you see what designLAB has to present. So tonight, designLAB members are Marianne, Bob, Eric, and Ben. So I will turn it back over to Ben.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Tina, and thank you, of course, to the building committee members who are with us this evening, and to all of the public community members who have joined us. It's wonderful to have everybody here, even in this virtual format. So for this evening, we're going to spend a few minutes here at the beginning, giving you a little bit more of an introduction, as well as talking about our overall schedule and process. We'll then shift gears and share a summary of our building assessment and findings from our tours back in August. We'll also share, following that, a summary of our community feedback effort, our first round of community feedback, with a series of boards that we posted around town. And then from that information, from our building assessment and all of the community feedback, we developed a series of guiding principles, as well as a program summary and some inspiration for that may be applicable to the future of Randall. So we'll share all of that with you. And then, the sort of main event is to review preliminary concept design strategies. So we'll spend a chunk of time doing that in this format with everyone. And then once we do that, we'll break out into smaller breakout sessions. So we'll have 3 breakout sessions. You'll be automatically sort of randomly assigned to one of those. And within those breakout sessions, there will be a member of the design team. And just as important, there'll be a member of the building committee as well. And we've got a series of sort of questions and prompts to talk about in response to what you'll see this evening. We're going to collect all of that feedback online, and then we're going to gather back together virtually like this to share that feedback and then discuss next steps. So just quickly, a little bit about designLAB. We're about a 15-person studio in the Fort Point district of Boston, and our studio focuses predominantly on projects in the cultural arts that enhance the communities they serve. We do a lot of library work, both public library work as well as higher ed academic library work, and we're a nationally recognized leader in library planning. We're also a recognized leader in transforming and adapting buildings of historic and cultural significance, much like your beautiful Randall Library. Several of the buildings that we've worked on are registered on local, state, and national historic place registers, including the Boston Public Library's McKim building that we just completed a master plan for over the summertime. And most recently, we just completed a renovation of the Carnegie Library in the city of Somerville. We actually celebrated the opening of this project just a couple weeks ago. And we thought to start off here, we just share a little bit about that project to just sort of showcase the opportunities that these wonderful buildings from the turn of the century represent, and the opportunities in how they can serve the future 21st century library patrons. So this project, again, it was a Carnegie Library. It was opened in 1909, and it's fair to say over the building's history and its decades of use, since it opened, it became quite tired and underutilized, but at the same time was a very proud civic structure within its community. One of the bigger challenges of libraries of this time, which is not unlike Randall, is that the building itself is not all accessible. Often you kind of have to ascend up a series of stairs to get to the main level. So that was a challenge at West Branch. It's of course a challenge at Randall too. And one of the ways that we solved that problem at the West Branch Library was creating a new entry pavilion and a new landscape that sort of connects both historic entries with a new entry to navigate that grade change. And then once you entered that sort of entry pavilion, you're presented with this sort of arrival sequence where you can access a new elevator that was inserted into the historic shell. You have direct views to the circulation desk, and also access to an informal reading room that acts as a community gathering space that spills directly outdoors to a sort of rear outdoor reading garden that can be programmed for a variety of uses, from small music performances to children's story time and many others. Here's a view of that new circulation desk and browsing areas for sort of arrival and kind of orientation, a new elevator tucked in the corner, and then you can see the addition beyond with that accessible entry. Within some of the most prominent historic spaces in this building, they were largely restored, slightly interpreted with a bit more of a contemporary palette, but very much in keeping with its historic character. And those spaces were largely repurposed as quiet reading and reference spaces. On the upper level, we actually moved the children's program from one part of the building on the lower level to the upper level and completely transform that space. You can see from the image on the bottom left. And then in the lower level, actually where the children's program used to be, again, you can see in that before photo in the bottom left, we repurposed and replanned the entirety of that level to house the collection and a series of meeting spaces as well. So getting back to our process, we're just at the very beginning here with the building committee. We're just about wrapped up with what we're calling and referring to as the programming and concept design effort. And as Tina described, that began, really in earnest in August. And we're going to be wrapping up here in about another month when the building committee brings their findings and recommendations to the town with the plan to present the building committee's recommendation in-town vote in the springtime. And we're actually, calling that the project initiation, because from that point, we'll be shifting from this sort of very high level concept design and programming conversation, into an actual design process where we're designing the building and the spaces. So what you see this evening, they're sort of very initial kind of high level ideas for how the building can be replanned and reconfigured programmatically and what that means architecturally. But then, once we get into an actual design process, starting with schematic design, hopefully, this coming spring and summer, we'll be digging into the design much more detailed. And we like to say that, the schematic design phase, which is the early phase of design, that's really kind of still designing the building. Design development, we shift gears, we go a little closer, more detailed. We're designing, more rooms within the building. Those rooms have all been configured and have a home, and we know where they are, and we're starting to look specifically at the room. And then the construction documentation phase, that's where we're really drawing and detailing all of the objects, all of the bits and pieces that will go into the building that are needed for construction. All of that's to say that that process roughly takes around a year, could be a little less, could be a little bit more. And then hopefully from that point, the project will proceed into construction. And with the bidding phase and all of that, we imagine that period will probably be a minimum of about 1.5 years once the project proceeds into bidding. And it's important to say that during those design phases, those early design phases, there will be additional opportunities for sure for community engagement and input. So by no means are what you're seeing tonight, one and done, this is it, this is the only opportunity that you're going to have to provide feedback. If the project does move past town vote in the springtime, there will be other opportunities as well. And it's also important to note that the fundraising effort through the trustees has already begun and is ongoing, and that will continue all the way through the design process as well, leading all the way into construction. So hopefully that provides a pretty good comprehensive view of what we're up to moving forward. And then just to reiterate what we've been doing in concept design, Tina did a great job sort of summarizing that. We began in August. That was sort of our building assessment phase. We were out at the library multiple times with consultants, our landscape architect, trying to really get to know Randall and the site and what's going on. We presented those findings back, and we'll be sharing those with you here in a moment. And then we shifted gears and started to develop a program. What we were hearing from the building committee, library staff, we heard a lot from the community as well, and that started to inform our program, which we'll share this evening. And then we started back in September-ish, starting to take those program pieces and think about design strategies. So we'll share those with you tonight as well. Okay, so on the building assessment and findings, starting with landscape, the site for Randall is quite prominent. And we think there's a real opportunity for a more usable social space as part of the landscape for the town and library patrons to use, and potentially even a connection across Common Road to the town common space. Even without work to Common Road, and we'll talk about that a little bit later during our design options, I think it's fair to say that the library entry is not necessarily the most welcoming. The sort of approach up to those steps and through the ramp, it's a little convoluted. It's not the most inviting. So we think there's an opportunity to sort of reconfigure how that works and how one approaches the building. There's a couple outdoor program spaces in the library now. There's that sort of terrace space outside of the historic building. And then there's also that sort of depressed amphitheater space. And I think those are sort of well-intended originally. They're not very well utilized, and there's certainly a series of challenges with each of them. So thinking about how those could be reconfigured and reused is part on our minds as well. And then we think, coming from the opposite direction from Crescent Street, that's a prominent view of the library as well, which is sort of not as noticeable. And we think there's opportunity to improve that. From an architecture and building envelope, we talked about it a little bit, but we do think there's sort of a compromised entry sequence, where you park your car. If you need to use a ramp, you have to sort of walk all the way past the library entrance and then double back. It's not the most inviting sequence to get up onto the terrace. The terrace itself is not that graciously proportioned. It's a little cramped. So we think there's opportunity to rethink all of that. As many of you, I'm sure know, and Tina certainly knows with her staff, there are several active leaks in the building. Roofs leak, windows leak, both in the original historic building and the 1970s edition, and we definitely need to get all of those issues addressed. The masonry conditions, both the original brick and the 70s brick, generally sound, but there are some deficiencies and issues that need to be addressed, and some aren't insignificant. A lot of repointing that needs to be done. Some of the ornamental stonework is in tough shape, and we certainly want to restore all of that. A lot of accessibility issues within the building. Obviously, there's no elevator. That's a huge problem. Even the stair that exists now, it's not a non-conforming stair from an accessibility perspective, just the way the handrails work. A lot of non-conforming door hardware, restrooms. There's a lot of issues that are required to tune all of that up and make the building accessible. And then acoustically within both portions of the library, that's a big challenge as well. There's a lot of noise bleed within the historic spaces from one to the other, and then there's certainly a lot of noise bleed and transfer from the mezzanine level of the 70s edition down to the lower level. Building systems. So when we say MEP, FP, that's just an acronym for mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection systems. There's a lot on screen here. For the most part with all systems, with the exception of some of the mini split systems that were installed recently within the past 10, 20 years or so. There is no fire protection system in the building. When I say that, I mean a sprinkler system. Certainly if the building is substantially renovated and increases in size or configuration in any way, we will need to do that. As I said, much of the older equipment is beyond its useful life. The main electrical boards are beyond their useful life, and the electrical rooms where the service is, that doesn't meet any of the sort of code requirements. And we also know that we'll need to further evaluate the existing septic tank if the building is increased in size or users, the amount of users is increased. That triggers an evaluation of the septic system. And there's also incomplete fire alarm notification coverage. So there's a lot going on, a lot of things that need to be addressed from a building systems perspective. Structurally, no huge issues, but one of the bigger issues that we're contending with is that the main level, the upper level of both the historic building and the 70s edition, just the way those were built and what code requires now in terms of the amount of weight to support a library collection, neither of those spaces can adequately support a library collection. So that's a challenge. The roof of the addition does not meet the code requirements for load capacity. And we're going to be talking about this in a little bit with one of our potential schemes, but the addition foundations, the 75 addition foundations, one of our schemes exploring building up, but one of the issues with that strategy is that the existing structure is not adequate to support those, so they would have to be modified. So sorry to talk so much about all that stuff, but it's important to note that, with any renovation strategy moving forward, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of issues within the existing building, as well loved as it is, that needs to be addressed moving forward. I think Tina will share some ideas, some thoughts with some of the challenges from a library programming perspective.
Thank you, Ben. As Ben mentioned, Randall is not without its challenges. Libraries now are more than our, books and our periodicals, and many of you use the library, and there is a lack of quiet study spaces, an inability to host multiple groups at a time, and underutilized space in general. Groups use libraries now to hold meetings and host programs and study, and children visit for story times and crafts and educational programming. And our students are finally coming back and down from hail and playing hide and seek. But at present time, the historical second floor is underutilized because there is a lack of separation among the rooms that are up there. And I think we can better serve our library if we are able to host more than one group at a time. And right now, the best we can do is one group at a time. Right now, our children's space is disjointed. We have materials on the first floor, and we hold programming on the second floor because the second floor, as Ben said, cannot hold a library collection. We did try to create a young adult space during COVID. It's difficult because by nature teens want to be by themselves, and we really should have a dedicated space for teens to do their work and relax. So I would say that quiet spaces, program rooms, computer areas, and teen space are all not possible due to the current building and its layout. And our goal with renovating Randall is to create a space and spaces that meet the current and future needs of our community by creating more flexible areas that can adapt to the changing needs as we go forward.
Excellent. So lots to think about, and we'll share here in a little bit how all of these thoughts have informed some of our initial planning strategies. Before we do that, I wanted to give a brief summary on the initial community feedback effort that we've gone through. Of course, we're amidst another one this evening where we'll hear from all of you. But back in October, some of you may recognize these slides, but we printed a couple different boards that we distributed around the town. The first board was set up to seek high-level input on 3 topics, just an overall vision for the library, library resources, and what type of programs you've utilized and you'd like to utilize in the library. The second board was a bit more specific. It was requesting feedback on what types of spaces within a renewed Randall library might be preferred. So we actually printed out a bunch of these boards and we distributed them around town to 8 different locations that you see on screen here. One within Randall, the middle school, center school, community center, a few of the local restaurants. And we also posted an online survey on SurveyMonkey with the same questions. Here are a couple of those boards in action. Got a fair amount of feedback through the sort of sticky dot sort of prioritization or selection of spaces that are preferred to folks, and we got a fair amount of feedback on the sticky notes as well. Overall, we had these in 9 locations. We got 456 dots, so we think that's a good couple 100 to 150 people at least through the sort of physical community input locations as well as the online survey. So we got a good representation of input from folks through these mediums. Here is our sort of sort of not directly transcribed, but we sort of paraphrased a bunch of the feedback that we got from folks into these sort of 5 quotes that you see on screen here. I won't read through them all, but there was a lot of interest in sort of creating a unified building between the historic and the addition and what that feels like. Interest in increased program spaces for children and for teens, a lot of interest in outdoor areas that support different types of programs than just individual, study or quiet reading. And we started to translate all of that feedback into spaces. So you're starting to see on the right different types of spaces, physical spaces that might facilitate the uses that people were interested in. So sort of space, of course, for computers and technologies, potential for additional workspace for staff, space for collection, of course, and general reading, and potentially small meeting spaces to support tutoring and other similar uses. Here's a summary of the types of spaces just in terms of the votes that we received via sticky dot on the boards or in the online survey. A lot of interest across the board for all the different types of spaces that we presented, but certainly some more than others. Children's room, quiet reading room, outdoor program space, and teen spaces were sort of the front runners, but plenty of interest for the other types of spaces as well. So from here, I'm going to pass this to my partner and colleague, Marianne Upton, who's been alongside for this whole ride. And she's going to walk you through the guiding principles that we've identified from this effort, our program summary, and then share some inspiration from other libraries that we've been thinking about and how they may be applicable to a renewed Randall.
Great, thank you so much, Ben. So if you'll go to the next slide, we'll show you how we've really synthesized based on the process that sort of Ben has walked you through up until this point, a distilled list of guiding principles that are really playing into our thinking and the concepts that we'll share with you very shortly. We'll try to keep this pretty brief so we can get to the fun stuff. The first of them is to provide an accessible and inclusive library experience for all. Also to create an integrated architectural experience between the 2 sides of the building, which we think we heard is a challenge currently. Provide a variety of program spaces that meets the needs not only of existing but new patrons, and address all of the issues, again, that Ben walked through in great detail that we understand in the building envelope, the building systems, and ongoing maintenance concerns. And then finally, we really see an opportunity to make a more welcoming landscape and entry experience. So here you'll see summarized on the left-hand side what is currently in the building and what it affords as far as different types of use. And you can see different sort of categories for those things. Summarized in the center of the slide are the requests and the needs that we heard from the staff and community feedback. That includes more staff support space, place and better showcase for the Library of Things. Quiet reading space, we understand the need for better acoustic separation is paramount, as you heard from Tina. Expanded and improved young adult offerings, children's offerings, and technology support, and the addition of a full service elevator. And so then you can see sort of the existing needs that are met, the new ones that have been identified as part of this process combined into our full program statement on the right-hand side. And we'll just kind of go through quickly some inspiration to show you really how each of those kinds of spaces might feel. And again, just so you have these pictures in your mind as we begin to speak about different spaces and how they relate to them and what the character might be. So the first set of inspiration images is just to talk about library support. Obviously, enabling the work of all of the wonderful staff members and librarians is paramount to serving the patrons. And these are, again, just a couple examples of service points and really well-appointed spaces to complete work. So just a couple pieces of inspiration there. Following on that, we will be thinking about the collection itself and how best to facilitate it. As we think about representing it, we are looking at different types of shelving and opportunities for browsing as well. So it's not just stack upon stack upon stack. It's not just about efficiency. It's about an experience. It's about presenting the material in a better way, and also just thinking about better organization and flow. We'll also be giving the reading spaces a good look, and we have some really wonderful candidate rooms already that we think we can amplify and really turn into fabulous destinations for general reading, and also make them well appointed for quiet study as well. We will also be looking to better integrate the children's collection and the programming and support it better. And again, just some inspiration from recent work on what those kinds of spaces might feel like. We'll also be integrating different scale meeting rooms from more large, flexible spaces that have a lot of infrastructure to support different modes of operation, as well as we understand the importance of kind of small meeting rooms where different kinds of collaboration and study can occur. We'll also be integrating a dedicated space that better supports the teen population. As you heard from Tina, this is an important need. And again, just some examples of what that kind of destination might feel like. And then finally, we'll be looking at what the exterior can do for us, really using every bit of the property to support program use different times of the year as appropriate. So with that, I think we are ready to take a look at some of our concepts.
Yes, we are. That's the plan. Before we dig into these, I just want to reiterate what we set up at the beginning of this process, that these are our initial planning strategies in this concept design phase. We've got 3 strategies to share with you this evening that repurpose the existing building in different ways, and then explore expanding the building if the current 1970s edition were removed. So we're going to talk you through those. It's important to remember that square footages are approximate. These aren't dialed in yet. We're starting to inform the size of all of the spaces that we've been talking about that will be needed, and we have a general sense of how big each space will need to be, and therefore how big each planning strategy overall will be. But there inevitably will shift and evolve as the designs are iterated upon moving forward. Also, the material palette and sort of the architectural character that you're going to start to see here in a moment, same sort of thing. This is an initial pass. It's an idea. It's a way to start communicating idea and character to the building committee and to all of you, but it most definitely will evolve. So there's a lot of opportunity once this project does get advanced and we have an overall planning strategy in place. When it gets advanced, hopefully in the springtime, there'll be opportunities to refine all of this, and nothing is set in stone from what you see here. So this is going to be the format of the sort of planning strategies that we're going to share with you. So you see in the bottom left of your screen a lower level floor plan of the library with the surrounding landscape. Above that is a proposal for the second level. And then on the right, what we've done is we've taken that program statement that Marianne was just describing, and we've identified which of the spaces we're achieving and which we weren't able to achieve. Those are sort of the outlined version. This is our sort of least impactful scheme. We're calling it Scheme A or Option A. It's a reuse strategy where we maintain the existing footprint of the library as it stands now entirely. It does not increase in size, and the sort of configuration of spaces within either the historic portion of the library or the 70s edition, they basically stay the way they are, with the mezzanine condition in the addition. The collection in this scheme takes up the entirety or much of, I should say, the lower level of the historic building. And upon arriving in the 70s edition through the current entry, you're presented with a sort of more open sort of browsing area and sort of presented with a kind of library of things. And as I mentioned earlier, the reason that we have the collection on this floor is because the upper levels, as it's currently configured, cannot adequately support it. There's a series of workspaces for staff on the lower level, technology with it sort of embedded and computers embedded within the collection area, and a meeting room tucked off to the right in what is now sort of a kind of double height space where the mezzanine is up above. On the upper level, the historic space portion of the building is used for children's collection and program, with a collection in one of the spaces and then a program space in the other. Certainly sort of creating sort of sound separation from those spaces in the existing library will be something will be very important. We capture one of the historic spaces for a dedicated young adult room. And it's important to describe that in all of the schemes that you're going to see this evening, from a landscape and approach perspective, we're proposing to reintroduce an entry point through the historic entrance, sort of perched up on the hill in the original building. So that's something that's consistent in all of these schemes. And then the last portion of the strategy that I didn't mention is the upper level of the 70s edition that is sort of repurposed as a sort of general reading area in what is now the collection space. We are proposing to introduce acoustic separation between the mezzanine and the lower level to help deal with some of the challenges that we're presented with now. And it's important to note, as I mentioned, that there are a couple program spaces that we're not quite able to achieve here, that we don't have enough space to fit. Quiet reading room space for the dedicated reference collection, small sort of tutoring type rooms for 2, 4, maybe 6 people. As I described, the landscape isn't a huge intervention. We are proposing to create a path up the hill to the sort of historic entrance and try to weave in a ramp on that hillside so you can get access up there. You'll see that the amphitheater here has gone away, so that is no longer part of the proposed landscape strategy. The terrace coming off Common Road, the sort of arrival terrace, it's been slightly reconfigured. The ramp is now facing towards the parking, so you have a more direct path of travel coming from your car. The stair is largely the same, and the terrace itself really hasn't grown much. In this scheme, we are maintaining the direction on Common Road in both ways as it is now, and we'll talk about how that might be thought of differently in future schemes. But that's largely what we're proposing here for scheme A. Here's a view of what that might look like. It's not dramatically different than from what you all know now. Again, you see that sort of entry and that stair sequence up the hillside to the historic entrance. So you can have an entry into the children's area through there. The 70s edition that you know now and the entrance there, again, it's mostly the same. We are hoping, if we were to proceed with this scheme, to poke a little bit, create a little bit more transparency between the inside of the library and Common Road. So you're seeing some new openings in the wall that don't exist now. But other than that, it's largely the same. Okay. So we're going to walk through all 3 of these. Marianne's going to take you through the next 2, and then we'll summarize them all, and then go into our breakout rooms to discuss them.
Great. Thanks, Ben. So our second option or strategy, we were looking at the possibility of trying to keep the existing footprint, but find some additional square footage to try to do better and against our list of program requirements. So here, as I said, the footprint remains largely the same, but the second floor of the 70s edition would be raised to create additional square footage on that level. This actually requires significant and complex structural modifications to the facade and to structurally reinforce everything. But it would allow us to actually move that collection to the second floor, whereas you heard in the as is, we wouldn't be able to do something like this. The children's programs and collection space are on the lower level of the historic building with a modest addition over the footprint of the current amphitheater. A portion of the main level of the historic building is utilized as a young adult space, with the balance of the historic space on this level maintained for entry, reading, and meeting areas. There's still a handful of program spaces that aren't achieved. The support space for the children's programming, a break room for staff, and those small meeting rooms or reading rooms. And while the square footage is increased in this scheme, we are not able to realize everything, largely due to the inefficiencies because of the irregular footprint. But we really were trying to test out how we could maximize the existing situation, potentially modify it to gain some additional area. In this option, we are looking at a proposal that would narrow Common Road. This would take it to just one-way drive lane, but leaving space for parallel parking on one side, much as it is used today. What this affords is some additional space at the entry to make a much more generous terrace and kind of arrival sequence to the front door. And similar to the first option, we are also looking at here establishing access through the historic door and making our way up the hill to that point. So if we go to the next slide, this is a view of what that might look like. Here you can see the sort of modified and raised second level of the 70s edition. What that more generous kind of entry terrace might feel like in the foreground. And again, the kind of procession up the hill to the historic front door. Then finally, we did look at an approach that would replace the 70s edition in its entirety, stripping back to the original footprint of the first structure and rethinking what that edition could be and what it might afford us. In this proposal, it would sit parallel to the historic building. It's much more uniform and compact. It extends kind of to the east and has views into the northern woods behind. There's a mix of program there from small meeting rooms on the first floor and children's programming on the second, with views out to the landscape kind of in both directions. In this option, the collection is mainly on the first floor. The historic spaces are maintain their traditional character and are reprogrammed for new uses like quiet reading and reference. This edition also has a flexible meeting space with a dedicated entry after hours that can be programmed for a variety of uses, from community gatherings to lectures and small performances. But what's great is the plaza directly adjacent for access again, so that parts of the library can be shut off, but that piece of it could potentially still be activated and serve the community at different times. In this option, mainly because we have the ability to proportion the footprint and have much more control, all of the program spaces are achieved and they are much more efficient. As for the exterior experience, there are some similarities to B, but we have a much more kind of ceremonial procession up the hill to the historic entry and reconfigured plaza that kind of wraps around the addition that really serves to support that interior use so that there could be some sympathetic programming on the outside as well. And so we will take a look at how that feels in a couple images. Here is a preliminary view of what that could be like on the second floor of the addition. Here you see an open stair that connects you to the entry level on the left-hand side and gracious openings between the addition and the historic building, which really starts to stitch the pieces of the building together much better than the current experience unfolds. The children's space and the new elevator is just sort of off the frame to the right in this view. We also studied what it might feel like to be in the kind of original entry lobby, looking back towards this addition. Again, you can see the sight lines through and how we're thinking about these spaces really opening up to one another and having better connections across and through. Here, the original entry is restored. You can see the kind of doors on the right-hand side there. And again, we're imagining a lot of activity and movement through this space. And then finally, the exterior view to match the other studies that we've done for the other schemes. Again, just a very preliminary first pass at what the proportion might feel like. But here we're really trying to defer to the original architecture, but have them be really compatible in the geometry. Here, the footprint is actually a bit more modest than the current configuration, but again, I think because of its more kind of compactness, that's a benefit. It's pushed back from Common Road further, so we have that foreground, that forecourt to use, and it really allows us an opportunity to create a more welcoming and programmable outdoor space.
Okay, all right. So that's our summary of the three schemes. Again, sort of looking at three different types of intervention. Option A is largely reusing what's there. Option B is adding on sort of vertically on top of what's there now to create an entire sort of second floor level rather than just the mezzanine condition. And then option C is sort of all new construction to replace the 70s edition with a new edition. So we outlined here some, positives and negatives, if you will, or pros and cons for each of the scheme. Looking at scheme A, it's certainly the least invasive. And as such, it's the lowest investment, and we'll talk about that a little later. But there are a lot of sort of challenges or cons, if you will, that we aren't achieving. One of them is that we're not achieving all of the program goals. And fundamentally, the building as we experience it now, it doesn't fundamentally change. It's much the same, and there's not a huge opportunity for sort of big impact change from what we all know. Renovating the building. We use the word patchwork here, but because we're introducing new building systems into an existing building for both the historic portion and the 70s edition, it sort of creates a patchwork condition. We're not able to introduce an all new building system to service all of the 70s edition in a way that's really sort of efficient. So that's a challenge. And then this may or may not be a con, but we can likely reuse the existing septic system as it is now because we're not dramatically changing the use of the building. Option B has a series of challenges as well. We are realizing the majority of program goals. That's fair to say, though not all of them. And the biggest challenge that Marianne was describing, it's really hard to right size program spaces in that configuration. It's very angular. There's a lot of kind of just sort of tough spaces to put new program uses in. So it creates a relatively inefficient system. And this is a bit of a detail, but the way the building works now with the sort of mezzanine condition facing Common Road, that creates a little bit of relief on that lower level because you have views up and it's kind of a higher ceiling height. But if we build over entirely on the second level, it's going to create a pretty compressed feeling on that entry level. And certainly it's a higher investment to A. Option C is also a higher investment. There's no doubt about that when compared to A. We're sort of able to replan the addition to support all of the program spaces that we've identified and sort of right size them. It's the most efficient in space use. It's also most adaptable and flexible for future needs because we can be thinking about that more because we have the ability to control the sizes and footprints of each room. We think it's worth saying that it is present the most opportunity for sort of most impactful and sort of experiential change from what we know now. We can create a whole new entry into the library, create a whole new landscape, and it would feel quite different than what we all know. And then certainly, because it's mostly a new building, we can design the envelope to meet the most efficient, what makes the most sense from an efficiency and sustainability perspective. We have much better control of how we design the building systems because we're not trying to needle it into an existing structure. So that creates a lot of efficiency from a mechanical perspective and also maintainability for the town. So those are the sort of high level, benefits and challenges with each of the schemes. Again, you've seen all of this before, but it just kind of puts it all on one slide for you to compare what spaces are achieved against one option against the other. In terms of building size, now we wanted to share this because, it's important to understand kind of how big each building strategy is. But I want to reiterate what I said earlier in the evening, that these are preliminary numbers. They're bound to change and evolve, as iterations progress through the design process. So the existing building now in that top bar is roughly 4,500 square feet of what we call usable programmable space that patrons can be in, staff can be in, and can use. Totally, the building is around 8,000 square feet, and that's what's represented over in that bar on the right. The efficiency of the building isn't that great. The library is doing a wonderful job of using as much space as possible, but just based on its configuration, it's not the most efficient of layouts. In Scheme A, we seek to improve that. We aren't changing the overall square footage. It's still around 8,400 square feet total, but we are trying to increase the usable square footage considerably from what's there. And that's just possible based on replanning things. But again, we're not able to fit everything in Scheme A. We do even a little better in Scheme B because we gain that square footage. Which is actually a fair amount of square footage on the second level when we build over that mezzanine. But while we're able to increase the usable square footage, the building itself isn't that efficient because of all of the irregularities in the footprint and being able to right size spaces like we've been talking about. So while that does yield the most square footage, it's around 10,500 square feet. It's not the most efficient use of space. Scheme C is similar, actually quite similar to B in terms of the amount of usable square footage. It's around 7,000, just about where B is. It achieves all of the programmatic needs and spaces, unlike B, which misses the mark on a couple. And we can do that in a much more efficient way. So the sort of space needed for building support, all of the mechanical rooms, electrical rooms, all of the other service and walls and circulation spaces, we can do a much better job making that a more efficient layout. Okay, so with all of that, we're going to pause here and go into our breakout rooms. So in a moment here, we will do that. But before we do, just sort of a brief summary of how the breakout rooms are intended to work. So you're going to be randomly assigned to one of 3 breakout rooms. The sort of groups are listed on the left. There'll be a couple members of the building committee in each group, as well as a member of the design team, member or 2. And we have a series of discussion topics or prompts that we're going to put on screen, and we'll be able to sort of take live feedback from the discussion. And then when that's done in 15 minutes or so, our intention is to come back as a group together with everybody, and then the building committee moderator from each of the breakout groups is going to share the highlights of the discussion from their group with everyone, so we can sort of hear from each group and what was discussed. And then we've got a couple next steps to talk about as well after that. So I think, Eric, we're all good to go here. We can break out into our groups and we'll all convene back here in a little bit.
Yep, so you guys should all see a message shortly that will distribute you to your groups. And just remember to unmute yourself when you have a comment to make. And your moderator should be able to answer any questions that you have. So here we go.
Well, we're back, everybody. That 15 minutes went quite quickly, actually. It was wonderful. We were in the midst of a conversation in our group. I'm sure you all were as well. I'm going to share my screen again, and if we could, Tina, I'm going to put you on the spot since you're our library director here this evening. And if you could, we had a couple interesting conversations in our group. I was doing my best taking notes, but admittedly it was not super diligent. But if you could perhaps share I'll put up the Jamboard, and if you could maybe share just a summary of what we heard, that would be wonderful.
We talked a lot about just the difference in square footage and how that impacts how we're meeting the needs that we heard from the community. We talked about outdoor space and how the intent in the 1970s edition was, to have outdoor space. It just didn't quite work out that way with the amphitheater outside children's and the upper level deck. So I was saying how excited I was with the prospect of having more outdoor space, because on a day like today in November, we could do things outside if we wanted to. I think that was it, really, right? Yeah.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about just the benefit of creating all of the right support spaces to support staff and just the day-to-day functions of the library, workrooms, so that staff can prepare programs or assess and process portions of this collection if they need to receive new collections. Talked about that as an important factor just in any successful library renovation. We're also starting to talk about the kind of benefits of the different landscape schemes and what it might mean to reduce the width of common road versus not, and what that affords to the landscape and entry sequence. How about I'll click forward to group 2. Marianne, bless you. You did a wonderful job, it looks like, taking notes. If Brian, if you wouldn't mind kind of sharing what you all were hearing in your group, that would be wonderful. Are you with us, Brian? I don't see him.
Sorry, that's on me. My microphone was muted twice. So we talked a lot about the appeal of reopening the historic main entrance and the things that and the opportunities that might exist there and some of the challenges. For example, a point was brought up about potential additional parking at the old fire station. Potentially opening up additional parking at the new fire station and how that would actually drive people to walk through and up to and into the new opened historic entrance. There's a commentary on how the children's area and the teen reading area is become really apparent with the changes that have come through with COVID, as well as how the sort of historic character of the building really drives that sort of campus midtown feel of the center of Stowe. And finally,
$3 billion out of the taxes that I'm paying.
Brian, we're getting some background noise. Is there
no, I'm sorry. There's my wife is in a meeting on the other side of the room and we're gonna need some feedback.
Oh, some competing Zoom meetings. Okay.
Yeah. Why don't Marianne, why don't you finish this off for me? Because I don't think I'm gonna be able to finish this without some background.
Yeah, sure. Sorry if I missed a couple of points there. But we did talk about the importance of sustainability and what an efficient, more compact footprint would do, just from long-term operational standpoint. There was a ton of support. I think I heard it over and over and over again about the excitement about the front entrance being reactivated. And we did hear some pointing to some other good examples. I think Bolton was mentioned in our group, and I also see it in the chat here as well. And we did tour some other facilities, and that's certainly come up in some of our research, but we'll certainly give it another look, especially because it seems to be on everyone's mind. So I think that captures where we got.
Excellent. Okay, and then lastly, group 3. If Lisa, you wouldn't mind sort of summarizing what you all discussed and what you heard.
Sure. I think that echoing what Group 2 was talking about, there was a lot of excitement about opening up the historic entrance. There was also a lot of enthusiasm about option C and the opportunity to bring a lot more light into the building, into and more accessible entrance, the fact that it made the property feel very usable. The efficiency of the use of space, the representation of low shelving as an option for socializing, making the space in general just feel more open when it's not stack upon stack. There was a question about how you manage security when you have two separate entrances in the space, and so I think that that's something that maybe Tina can talk a little bit about how libraries manage two entrances. I think people were very excited about the opportunities to improve upon what's there in a way that's still feels right for the site. There was some discussion about the shape of option C, and Bob did reiterate the notion that this is all still a work in progress. These are more conceptual ideas. So really great enthusiasm. I think we could have talked for about 45 minutes, quite frankly.
Good. No, that's wonderful. Well, thank you everybody for participating. You guys had one more slide here. Is there anything here you wanted to hit on?
Well, I think, yeah, the one thing that people did talk about was opening up that second entrance. Would there be parking that would make that a practical entry for people? Why would they walk past the road, the common road entrance to go up the hill unless there's parking, say, across?
Oh, interesting. Yep.
Yeah, where the old firehouse was.
Good. That's a good thought. Well, I think, not to assign grades, but it looks like group 3 here, you guys were the most interactive, or certainly the most diligent in your note taking. So thank you to everybody for your conversation and feedback. I'm going to switch back to the presentation here. So we just have one more section to go through with you all. And then we can wrap up our evening. Thank you again for all of the conversation and feedback. We want to now talk about our preliminary cost estimates for each option. That's an important consideration, a very important consideration as we evaluate options to move forward. And then we'll just hit on the schedule again quickly as a quick refresher and wrap up our evening. Let me go full screen here, excuse me. Hopefully that gets bigger for you guys. So we have developed a preliminary cost estimate for each scheme. And before we share those specific dollars, which we will here in a moment, we wanted to talk about our approach to how we establish the cost model. So we started by identifying what we refer to as base costs. And these are building costs that must be addressed sort of regardless of program needs or conceptual design options. It addresses all of the stuff and all of the issues that we started out this meeting talking about, all of the building system issues, the leaking roofs, and all of that, all of the accessibility issues, getting a new elevator into the building. That is all part of what we're defining as base costs. And then on top of those costs, we categorize improvements per scheme into 3 categories: site work, that includes landscape and any sort of civil or exterior work, architectural improvements in that sort of light blue color, and then building systems in the pinkish color. Now, on top of that, we have what we refer to soft costs. So, our estimate gets us to the direct construction costs, what it's going to take to actually build the building. But then there is a lot of soft costs on top of that. Perhaps the biggest one is projecting escalation out until, at the moment, we're estimating construction start potentially, hopefully, in the spring of 2023, so 2 springs away. So we have to account for what the construction market is going to do in that 1.5-year time frame. There's certainly moving in and storage expenses, so the library has to move out, there has to store the collection somewhere and then move back into the new library. There could be temporary facility expenses if the library wanted to create a little pop-up storefront somewhere in town, so people could still come and collect books, fixtures, furnishings, shelving, equipment, all that sort of stuff that's not necessarily architectural, but you need to put into a library to make it function. Hiring an owner's project manager and a design team and their consulting staff to design the building. So the list kind of goes on and on. I won't read everything there in that right-hand category, but you get the idea that it's a considerable portion of any cost model above and beyond the construction costs. And then what you're seeing on the left, I started to describe that, but those are the types of things that go into the base building improvements. So any enabling work to facilitate a construction process, all of the accessibility improvements to get people in an accessible means into the building and then through the building with a new elevator, fixing all of the envelope issues with the leaking roofs, leaking windows, repointing and restoring, and in some cases replacing some of the masonry elements, and then all new building systems within the current building. So a new mechanical system, introducing a sprinkler system, bringing all of the lighting up to code, and a number of other things. So with all of that in mind, here is our sort of overall summary of our preliminary cost estimate. So, the base cost that we have estimated with our cost estimating team and feedback from our consulting engineers to fix all of the things that are currently an issue and a challenge with Randall, it's around a $4 million investment that does everything that I just described. Installs a new elevator, new building systems, addresses leaking roofs, but it doesn't address sort of any of the reconfiguration of spaces that we've been talking about in either of the options or some of the enhancements to the landscape. Option A, once you account for the sort of programmatic reconfiguration and new finishes, as well as all of the soft costs, we are expecting, again, this is going out to a spring of 2023 construction date of around a $5.8 to a $6.8 million project. Option B is more than that, by around $1 million. It is in the 7.7 to 8.9 range to achieve everything that was outlined in option B. And then option C is sort of right alongside B, not much different, around a 7.8 to an $8.8 million investment total project cost. That is what we're anticipating at this stage. That's a major consideration, of course. It is a major capital investment for any level of intervention. Even Scheme A is a major investment, of course, for the town, but would well serve this town well for many generations following a renovation. And then B and C, as I said, are around a $2 million higher number than what we had estimated for A. That is our summary. We're remarkably just about on time here for 8:30, which is wonderful. Thank you all for joining us again. Again, I just wanted to put the schedule on here and just remind everybody kind of where we are. We're just wrapping up our programming and concept design effort. I know a few folks did join late, probably after we described this at the beginning. So the goal here is to take this to town meeting. The building committee is going to take all of this feedback and their thoughts and provide their recommendation to town administrators next month, with the anticipation that it will be at town meeting for vote in the spring, at which point that'll sort of initiate the design and documentation process. Anticipate that'll be about a year-long effort, take us potentially into the spring of 2023 for a construction start. There's plenty of opportunity, as I said at the beginning, for community input along the way if the project continues, and also plenty of opportunity to fundraise to support the project. So I think, Tina, you had a couple concluding words to share.
I just wanted to say thank you to designLAB and Denise and the building committee and everybody on this call and who isn't on this call that's been helping guide us through the past 12 months and will continue to do so through May. As Ben said, there's still a lot of work to be done. So please send me your any other feedback that you'd like. I think they're going to put up my email in the chat or on the slide. And like, we just have work to do to get this project off the ground, continued fundraising, and just thank you all for coming.
Did Tina, did you want to say anything about the fundraising effort to
Thank you,
date?
Ben. I forgot because Lisa and I had talked about it. So the trustees of the Randall Library met this month, and they have already pledged $500,000 toward this project. So that is an amazing start to our fundraising, and I'm thrilled that the trustees are such a great supporter of the library, and so that's just a great start.
It is. It's a wonderful and exciting start. So I'm going to just click out of this really quick and then go back into it. I added your email address here. So I'll just make this full screen again, give everybody a couple moments to jot that down. At the bottom there.
It's in the chat too for anybody.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Marianne.
Yep.
So you can grab that from a couple different spots. Certainly feel free to share any feedbacks or thought with Tina, and she'll share it with us. And thank you again, everybody, for your time this evening. And hopefully we'll see you all again in the not so distant future. Very good.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
I think it's safe for me to talk again.
Yeah, sure. Cool. Well, we didn't really talk about having the group hang on afterwards, so I think we'll connect with Tina and the building committee afterwards. But thank you, Eric.
Yep. Thank you.
Well done. We'll talk tomorrow. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.